On the night of July 12th, 2015, 18-year-old Tiffany Valiante, a young lady and promising young athlete in Galloway Township in Mays Landing, New Jersey, went missing after an argument with her mother. Before this argument, Tiffany and her parents were enjoying Tiffany's graduation party at her uncle's house across the street from where they lived, when Tiffany's mother would receive a call that would snowball and unravel a series of questions and mystery. Welcome to the campfire. Grab your s'mores and grab a seat around the fire. I am your host, Kevin. This is the Campfire Crimes Chronicles, a true crime podcast. Thanks for joining me tonight around the campfire as we get into the case of Tiffany Valiante. So before we get into the episode, I have an announcement about a new sponsor that the podcast received, and I just like to talk a minute about the sponsor. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just need to answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you can get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you, more scheduling flexibility, and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/CCC. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/CCC. So as I mentioned, Tiffany was an 18-year-old that was born in March of 97 and had two half-sisters that were older than her. She had just graduated from Oakcrest High School in June of 2015, and upon graduation, she received a scholarship to play volleyball as a starter at Mercy College in New York, starting in August of 2015. Early on in 2015, Tiffany would come out as a lesbian and would begin dating a girl, which the two would break up on July 10th of 2015, according to reports, and Tiffany would begin dating a girl that she would meet online. Tiffany was also working a part-time job at a local Wawa's, which Wawa is a gas station and a quick stop where you can get coffee, food, and other types of drinks made. It's the equivalent to a Sheetz gas station if you have a Sheetz in your area. So it would be reported that Tiffany was dealing with a lot of personal struggles and issues in her life. Her friends would note that she was often depressed and that her friends saw what looked to be self-inflicted cut marks on her legs and wrists. Tiffany's mother, Diane, and Tiffany often argued and fought a lot. Diane would confess to punching Tiffany in the arm during one of these arguments, which would leave a bruise on her arm, and this would have occurred in 2014, which would cause one of Tiffany's teachers to be concerned and call CPS. Both Diane and Tiffany would attend counseling, where Tiffany would tell the therapist that she wasn't suicidal or depressed, where the therapist would ultimately rule that Tiffany was stable and also in a stable family relationship. So now we're going to get into the timeline. The night that Tiffany goes missing, she attends a graduation party with her parents at the house across the street, which is her uncle Michael's. Then at 9 p.m., one of Tiffany's friends calls Diane, which is Tiffany's mother, and asks to speak with her at their house about Tiffany. So Diane walks over, and Steve, which is Diane's husband, goes over with her, which then Diane and the friend start speaking around 9:15, where the friend would tell Diane outside that Tiffany had been using her debit card. So to straighten everything out, Diane calls Tiffany over, where then Tiffany denies ever using the card, and Diane sticks up for Tiffany by telling the friend that Tiffany didn't need to use her card because she has her own card to use. So this conversation lasts till about 9:24 when the friend leaves and Diane and Tiffany were going through her car to look for the debit card that Tiffany was accused of using, where Diane would see Tiffany slide the debit card into her back pocket, where the two would then start arguing, where then Tiffany confesses to using the card. The two argued for a couple minutes outside, where Tiffany would tell her mother that her friend gave her permission to actually use the card, but she was too drunk to remember, and which, according to reports and documentaries, Tiffany would claim that it was for gas while they were out. So what I found during my research was that when Tiffany and her friends would go out, Tiffany would usually be the designated driver for her friends while they were drinking while they would be out. So at this point, Diane would go inside to get Steve, and Diane would have left Tiffany outside for only about a minute or so. This would be at 9:27. So now two pieces of information to share before moving on. It would be later discovered that a receipt of the friend's debit card that Tiffany was accused of using would also be found in Tiffany's room. The other piece of information we need to talk about is that only a few months prior, Tiffany's parents had caught Tiffany actually stealing money out of their bank account, which this was reported by the Daily Beast. So at 9:27, Diane walks inside to get Steve, and the two of them walked outside where Tiffany would then be gone. This is at 9:29. They knew she wouldn't be able to walk too far without someone seeing her. Standing at 6'2", you would have to be blind to not see her walking down the street. So after a few minutes, Diane and Steve are looking for her and talking to the neighbors, seeing if they've seen her, and then remember about their trail cam that they had, and so they check it to see if it picked up Tiffany walking or picked up anything. So trail cam picks up a timestamp at 9:28 and shows Tiffany walking by the trail cam and looking off into a direction. So Tiffany's parents would make note that Tiffany was deathly afraid of the dark, to the point that she would almost have panic attacks, or would have panic attacks, of being in the dark alone for too long. Because of this, they knew that she wouldn't walk any kind of distance alone in the dark. So her parents and her neighbors were walking around looking for Tiffany, looking behind and around the houses within the short distances of the home. Tiffany's parents would go back over to the party asking if they had seen Tiffany, as well as calling her and her friends, including the friend that was there earlier about accusing her of using her debit card. So everyone from the party also started looking for Tiffany. They would be walking and driving around and also using ATVs to go through the wooded areas. Not long after Tiffany left her home, it would be learned that nobody had seen or knew of Tiffany's whereabouts or had seen her walking anywhere. Her parents began to worry when their texts and calls went unanswered. Around 11 p.m., Tiffany's phone is found laying in the grass outside of their home at the end of the driveway. This starts setting off alarm bells with both Diane and Steve, as they knew that Tiffany wouldn't go anywhere without her phone. Diane would make a point to state that she even had a special waterproof case so that Tiffany could take the phone into the shower with her. So now it's about 11:30 p.m. when Tiffany's parents call the police to report Tiffany missing, unknowing that it was too late. Tiffany would be struck by a New Jersey Transit train 4693 sometime around 11:15 p.m. So now let's assess this for a minute. If we look at the time that Tiffany disappears at 9:28 based on a trail cam photo, and from the time that she's struck by the train, which we'll go with 11:15, then that's an approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes. So now this is important to know because where the impact site of Tiffany being struck by the train is approximately 4 miles away. So if you walk at a pace of 3.5 miles per hour, then you can walk approximately 1 mile in 16 minutes, 40 seconds. So now where Tiffany was hit, as we stated, is about 4 miles away from the home, walking at 3.5 miles an hour with an average mile pace of 16 minutes 40 seconds, you would cover 4 miles in approximately 66 minutes, more than enough time to cover the distance between Tiffany's house and the impact site. But now we have to remember and take into account that Tiffany was diagnosed with nyctophobia, which is fear of the dark. Her parents would even state that in Unsolved Mysteries episode, and I mentioned a few minutes ago that she wouldn't walk any kind of distance in the dark. So the likelihood of Tiffany walking 4 miles by herself in the dark, very unlikely. So now the only logical explanation would be that Tiffany got into a vehicle with someone. This is just a matter of opinion, though. There's no evidence to really support this theory. So by the time that the train engineers report the impact of hitting a human and reporting it, the body is discovered in the early hours on Sunday of July 13th, 2015. So when Tiffany went missing, she was fully clothed with a blue jean shorts that were white, a t-shirt, a white headband, and shoes, according to the trail cam and reports from her parents. When Tiffany's body is discovered, she's partially dressed and barefoot, only wearing underwear and a sports bra. Her shirt would later be found at the impact site being ripped off and bloody. When the student engineer gives his preliminary report, they were pulling 4 cars traveling from Philadelphia to Atlantic City as a rescue train to another train that was broken down. They were traveling at 80 miles per hour. They used all appliances, according to the report: headlights, auxiliary lights, horns, and bells. The weather was cloudy, but it wasn't foggy or raining. The terrain was heavily wooded and rural, so there wasn't any light in the area aside from the lights on the train. Both the student engineer and the engineer stated in their initial reports that they didn't see Tiffany until they were right on top of her, and that Tiffany dove or jumped in front of the train. The New Jersey Transit train's black box didn't record a bell, however. According to the black box, there was approximately 4.1 seconds from the time that the student engineer saw Tiffany hit the horn and applied the emergency brake function in that order right before hitting Tiffany, which, after applying time for human factor and time recognizing that what they were seeing, 4.1 seconds is not a lot of time for a train traveling at 80 miles per hour. Common sense tells us that, and also so does second and third grade math word problems. Michael Valiante, who is Tiffany's uncle, would say in an interview with Unsolved Mysteries that he was driving to look for Tiffany and just had this feeling to go down Panama Road, where there was an access road, and then when he looked down, the area was all lit up with Galway police officers and the New Jersey Transit Police. He makes his way down there and starts talking to the New Jersey Transit Police officer, where they told him that the train had hit someone, and he just had this feeling that it might be Tiffany, although he was hoping it wasn't. And the police officer asked Michael if he would be able to recognize the body, and he said yes. So the police officer asked him to come and identify the body to confirm if it was or was not Tiffany. So, the wheelhouse of the New Jersey Transit Police isn't to investigate suspicious death or homicide cases. And railroad authorities are very particular about handling their own issues on the rail tracks, including the police that are for the railroads. This inexperience would cause the New Jersey Transit Police to, one, quickly rule that Tiffany was trespassing and had committed suicide. Also, any and all evidence that the New Jersey Transit Police had collected at the scene would end up being mishandled, and the chain of custody would ultimately be broken with the evidence, later on causing a lot of issues with the evidence, as we'll get into. So, after the New Jersey Transit and the Galloway Police Department cleared the scene and after the sun had risen, Tiffany's uncles, Michael and another family member, I believe to be an uncle, they would go out to the impact site where they would collect various items that they found from the authorities that were left behind, like a rubber glove and also bone fragments and a bracelet that had belonged to Tiffany. The newspaper the following morning printed an article about Tiffany being hit by the train and was already calling it a suicide. So this leads the ME, who is already under the notion of suicide and having bias towards the case that it's already suicide, would by default not look for anything stating otherwise to confirm suicide or show evidence of foul play. So before we get into the autopsy that was done, we're going to take a quick break and talk about our sponsor for this episode. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just need to answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you can get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/ccc. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/ccc. So the autopsy would be done on 7/14 of 2015. This wasn't your normal autopsy though. They had performed what they called an external examination. So it wasn't a full autopsy. They would report excessive injuries and trauma to the head, torso, and extremities. And also, the organs at the scene were collected and were placed in separate bags. However, the organs and the rest of the body would not be fully examined as it would in a full autopsy. As well as it was documented that the extremities were amputated from either the impact or prior to the impact. We do not know for sure. We presume from the impact of the train, which we'll discuss that a little bit here later in the episode. So as mentioned earlier, and in this report, Tiffany's body was found in her underwear and sports bra, and her shirt had been recovered but was ripped and bloodied and was assumed to be ripped off at the time of the collision, but there's no evidence if it was on or off prior to being hit by the train. According to the report, there wasn't any rape kit done on Tiffany's body. There wasn't any explanation of why it wasn't completed, just that it wasn't done. A toxicology report was done, which found no drugs and no alcohol in Tiffany's system. The ME would rule her death as a suicide. Tiffany's mother, along with other family members and friends, didn't believe Tiffany had committed suicide and were shocked and in disbelief that they could rule it as such so quickly. Diane would say in an interview with Unsolved Mysteries that Tiffany wasn't suicidal or depressed and that she had plans already to go to Six Flags Great Adventure the following morning with her friends. At the impact site, there was a pool of dry blood on the tracks that was noted. No samples were taken or tested to see if it was Tiffany's or an animal or something else. It's plausible that it just happened to be an animal that was hit at the exact same location as Tiffany was, but I believe that it would be unlikely, and I'm speculating that it was Tiffany's prior to being struck by the train, which we'll get into later. So, according to reports, that large pool of blood on the rail ties was from antemortem, which is before death. So, there was an axe that was at the scene with red markings on it. Reports would state that the axe belonged to the New Jersey Transit and that they used it to assist them in clearing the scene that night. Where, if we remember about the autopsy report, the ME noted that the limbs were amputated. And in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, the report that they saw, or whenever they talked to the ME, that the family said the limbs were cut off. So that would make me lead to believe that maybe they used the axe for that while they were clearing the scene and preparing the body to be transferred to the ME. That is all my opinion and speculation, though. We can't confirm this, though, because the axe, instead of being taken in for evidence, was lost. This would be the first piece of evidence that would be lost from the scene. So, according to reports, there was also a 24-second phone call made to Tiffany's phone at around 10:30 p.m., where the call was answered and lasted 24 seconds. The reports didn't mention who called Tiffany's phone and that Tiffany answered. However, we think about 24 seconds not being a long time, but it is definitely long enough to hold a conversation with somebody. So 3 or 4 days after Tiffany's death, Tiffany would be cremated, and any evidence or DNA that could have been recovered later on was gone. On July 16th of 2015, a canine tracking dog and his handler went out to try and reaccount the route that Tiffany may have taken that night that she was killed. Tiffany's uncle Michael, who, as we mentioned, lived across the street from where Tiffany lived, was also a state trooper who provided the canine tracking unit with a pair of unwashed shorts of Tiffany's. Where or how he obtained these shorts is not known. However, the scent dog picked up the scent at the home and at the end of the driveway would turn right, which would lead the tracking dog and the handler to a retention pond where they would pick up the scent and hold the scent there for a while, indicating that perhaps Tiffany had spent some time there prior to moving on, and then eventually leading to the tracks near the impact site. It wasn't exactly at the impact site, but it was pretty close to the impact site. And the dog handler would note that that was 3.6 miles from Tiffany's home. So, looking at the weather for the time between the night that Tiffany was hit by the train and by the time the tracking dog came out, there was a heavy rainstorm and also strong winds in the area at that time. Which, from my research, that not only moisture and rain can help carry and hold scents, but also the wind will also make scents travel. Now, I'm not a tracking expert or trained with bloodhounds to know enough about scents. However, that is what I have found on my own research. Also, in my research, I have learned that a bloodhound can pick up a scent from 12 miles away, which I don't know how accurate those reports that I have found online were. However, it's probably within the ballpark, I would imagine. So, within a week of Tiffany's death, the engineer and the student engineer would speak under oath of their recounts of what they saw that night with investigators. The engineer had stated under oath that he had his back turned and didn't see Tiffany jump in front of the train because he was speaking to the crew of the other train that they were going to rescue. And after speaking with the crew, he turned to the conductor who was outside of the cab to discuss what he had discussed with the other crew and the game plan that they were going to use once they got there. So 10 days after Tiffany was hit, the student engineer would speak under oath. And according to the student engineer, Tiffany appeared to be at a crouching position that about a half-mile away, he notices something in the distance but couldn't discern what it was. With all the auxiliary lights and headlights on bright, he states that he blows the horn to see if it moves. Then, in less than a quarter-mile away, he can tell that it was human wearing dark clothing that was crouched down. The student states that he is still blowing the horn, and then when the figure stands up, states that he recognizes right away that it's female, and within 5 seconds of hitting her, she jumps towards the lower portion of the cab. However, according to the train's black box, the horn was only blown once, and the impact matter of the train was on the lower left and the upper left side of the cab. So if Tiffany was jumping in front of the train, then we can presume that there would be more impact matter closer to the center or near the center of the cab. Either way you look at it, though, the preliminary reports of both the engineer and the student are completely different than when they spoke under oath. In the area of where Tiffany was hit by the train, both sides of the tracks, with a heavy tree line on both sides with no lights. The tree line was approximately 6 to 8 feet from the railroad, and also the railroad itself was sitting on approximately 2 feet of grade of gravel. 21 days after Tiffany was killed, Diane was walking towards the impact site on Tilton Road when she found Tiffany's shoes on the side of the road next to a tree, along with her headband from about 6 feet away from her shoes. The shoes were almost side by side, facing towards the road, according to reports. So now my theory is that these items were not there at the time of the tracking with the canine, because the canine would have picked up the scent from the shoes or the headband because it never tracked to that area, which if they were there at the time of the canine being there, then the canine would have tracked to them and they would have found the shoes then. Which makes me believe that after the canine had already done its tracking, the shoes were placed there. So also found at this location of where the shoes were was a paper tag for a key ring with a VIN number written on it. This paper tag is like the tag that a maintenance shop would put on the key ring of your vehicle when you take it in for service or at a valet. The VIN number would be linked to a vehicle of an individual that was at the graduation party the night that Tiffany died. However, no report stated that these findings were investigated. However, that doesn't mean it wasn't investigated, but as far as I could find, nothing had been done or followed up with of this paper tag that was found. So let's go back to the shoes for a minute. The shoes were found approximately 3 miles from the impact site. So if we go off the theory of suicide and Tiffany was alone, then this would mean that Tiffany had presumably walked 3 miles barefoot to the train tracks, going off of the theory she was alone and committed suicide. So, are you ready for the crazy part now? When the initial autopsy was done and reviewed by another ME on behalf of Tiffany's parents, the ME had stated that they found no abrasions, scratches, or scuffs on Tiffany's feet, as you would expect to find on someone who had walked 3 miles through the woods barefoot. Even if she didn't walk through the woods and she followed the road and then took the service road out to the train tracks, Walking on gravel and rocks on the service road, plus whatever was on the street road, would have still had scuff scratches at the very least on her feet. So later on, it comes out that one of Tiffany's friends would state that Tiffany had sent her a cryptic text message stating, quote, just answer yes or no, should I do it, end quote. It was also reported by some of Tiffany's friends that Tiffany would harm herself intentionally, cutting her legs and her wrists. One of Tiffany's friends would note that Tiffany would show signs of depression. However, this is the exact opposite of what would be said by Tiffany's family, especially her mother, which kids and young adults in the 17 to 20 range will often express more feelings with their friends than they will with their parents. This is a known fact in psychology, but you don't need to be a psychologist to figure that out. If you reflect on your life as a teenager and into your young adulting life, then ask yourself how much and what did you tell your friends as compared to what you told your parents. So, going off of everything I've researched, I would say that Tiffany was going through some sort of depression, and maybe it was from the stress of being a successful young athlete and having a scholarship to college, and also trying to make her friends and family happy. I don't think this was enough for her to go over the edge of suicide, though, but also having experience with individuals who have taken their own life, I know that when they make the decision, they're usually spending it with family, friends, and enjoying the time with them prior to taking their own life. However, I don't think this is the case with Tiffany, though. A retired medical examiner reached out to the family's attorney, who reviewed the statements and autopsy reports for the family, and also believes that Tiffany did not commit suicide. The family would petition to have Tiffany's cause of death amendment from suicide to unexplained. The state medical examiner at the time reviewed the case when the family petitioned for Tiffany's death to be changed from suicide to undetermined, and the ME agreed with the original ruling and ruled it as a suicide. Okay, so now we're going to look at reasons why foul play could have maybe have been involved. First, the ME that performed the initial autopsy had no scientific proof that Tiffany took her own life. Investigators and the ME most likely had blinders on going off of the reports of the engineers on the train, the engineer and the student engineer. So now looking at the scene, which it was dark, wooded, and a secluded area, it is possible that someone could have pushed Tiffany into the train and the conductor never saw them off the side. And in the midst of hitting Tiffany and attempting to stop the train, whoever had done that, supposedly, could have gotten away unnoticed. And they could have accessed the area through the service road, which also was used by first responders to access the impact site. So if there were any tire tracks or marks from a vehicle entering or leaving prior to that, then that evidence would be gone. So approximately 7 months after Tiffany's death, a manager at a local Wawa's came forward overhearing 3 male employees discussing Tiffany's death. The 3 males discussing Tiffany's death said it wasn't suicide, however, that Tiffany's friend with the credit card and 3 of her friends picked up Tiffany and made her strip down at gunpoint, which 2 of the males were known to have attended the graduation party that night. When the 3 males were questioned by authorities, they would deny ever saying anything of the sorts. Also, none of the family members or other material witnesses, including the friends, were ever interviewed in the immediate aftermath of Tiffany's death by investigators, including the friend with the credit card, or debit card, excuse me. The conclusion of Tiffany committing suicide by a mentally strong mindset, as well as after a day by the pool enjoying a graduation party, and plans the following day to great adventure with her friends, as well as shopping and preparing for college, and a scholarship ride to college that was set in August of 15 is quite unlikely. In 2021, the family had to go to court and sue for the evidence to be released to them, which a judge would grant in 2021. The family had to pay out of pocket for the DNA test to be done. The DNA evidence would show that there was an issue with the preservation of the evidence bags. The evidence was compromised and was essentially useless. This coming from a report from the DNA Center. The evidence bags or containers were opened multiple times, and when the bags were retaped closed, there was no new initials written on these new seals and labels, and you couldn't read the initials on the labels from before. So there was no way to tell who had handled the evidence after it was stored in evidence. So the chain of custody was broken. When examining the blood card of the DNA sample and other evidence, male DNA was detected. However, because of the chain of custody being broken and the mishandling of the evidence bags, the DNA that was being stored, there was no way to tell if the male DNA was from someone who handled the evidence prior or if it was from the night that Tiffany was killed. Also, Tiffany's bloody t-shirt that was retrieved from the scene, it was poorly stored and also poorly preserved, and it would be covered in mold, rendering it unviable for testing. So remember that paper keychain with the VIN number written on it? Yeah, that was lost too. So with so much mishandling of the evidence in this case that there was a court ordered issued to have the evidence reevaluated and retested. If you lose a key piece of evidence that you suspect could be a possible murder weapon, then that is just blatantly ignorance and laziness. This is just a matter of opinion, though, but I wonder if the investigators ruled her death a suicide so that they didn't have to admit to losing evidence. All right, guys, so that's a lot to take in right now. So we're going to take a break and talk about our sponsor of this episode before we get into my opinions about this case. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just need to answer a few questions about your needs and preferences in therapy. That way, BetterHelp can match you with the right therapist from their network. Then you can talk to your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether it's via text, chat, phone, or video call. You can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. If your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you can get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist who is custom-picked for you. More scheduling flexibility and at a more affordable price. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/ccc. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/ccc. All right, guys, we are back, and I hope you had a chance to replenish your s'mores, because now we're going to get into my opinions of this case. So, first off, I don't believe Tiffany's death was a suicide. If we believe the student engineer's recounts and that it was also accurate of what he saw and also going off of the reports of the retired ME, then I believe that Tiffany got into a car of someone that she knew, whether it be someone from the party, another friend that picked her up, or the friend with the credit card that picked her up. Either way, I believe it was someone that she knew, and she got into that car voluntarily. Also, if we examine the trail cam photo, you could see what appears to be headlights coming towards Tiffany, and perhaps maybe that's what she's looking at. So after getting into the car, I believe is when things start happening. So I believe that Tiffany was either murdered or at the very least this is manslaughter, where I believe that after Tiffany got into the car, that when she did, then maybe she was confronted about the card and something happened and it became physical. Maybe with a gun, maybe not. Then Tiffany was injured, perhaps, and found her way to the tracks while trying to get away, and then saw the train coming, and perhaps while being injured, when she got up to attempt to flag down the train, stumbled into the tracks when she was struck by the train. Or if she was murdered, then whoever committed the murder was trying to make it look like a suicide and waited for a train to come by to push her body into the train. But standing at 6'2" and about 200 pounds, according to reports, if she was unconscious or was already dead, then picking up 200 pounds of literal dead weight is not easy, especially if you're going to try to push that body into a train. It is, I'm going to say at the very least, difficult, maybe not impossible. So this makes me think that Tiffany was still conscious but injured and got away from whoever had attacked her, and she ended up at the tracks, and then her body just gave up and that's where she stayed, which would explain the pool of dry blood that was there and determined to be prior to Tiffany being hit by the train. Now, we have no proof that this was Tiffany's blood and that it could have been possibly an animal's, but the likelihood of an animal being hit at the exact spot where Tiffany was is very unlikely. I believe this is Tiffany's blood that was there whenever she stopped at the tracks prior to the train arriving. And with it being a warm, probably hot July night, in the at least 80s, I would say. That's just me guessing, though. And also from the train running over that spot later on, the blood would have had more than enough time to dry prior to Tiffany being hit. So now we'll go back to the cell phone call that was 24 seconds. And it had been found at the end of the driveway at around 11 p.m. So if we remember, Tiffany's friend with the debit card also came back after Diane called her about Tiffany missing, which there isn't a time on when that was, but I think just maybe that the friend was involved that confronted Tiffany and Diane and had Tiffany's phone and brought it back and dropped it in the yard whenever she returned. Also, Tiffany's shorts were never found. Tiffany had put the debit card in her pocket, and so if the friend with the credit card had picked up Tiffany with a few of her other friends, then if we go off the story of the three males is true, then when they made Tiffany strip, they took her shorts, found the debit card. That's when they attack her, and then Tiffany's able to escape and finds herself later at the train tracks. Also, part of the investigation that was missed was searching the phone records of that call that was made at around 10:30 that night. If they had done that, then you could see who had called and also the location of Tiffany's phone at 10:30 p.m. because that is approximately an hour after she disappears and 45 minutes prior to getting hit by the train. Also, had investigators requested the help of the FBI, then they have access and resources than what local PD and definitely more than what the New Jersey Transit Police have access to. And they could have followed the pings of her cell phone or satellite location if the location setting was activated on her phone, which most people do just leave it left on. So it would have been a safe assumption that that was left on and they could have used that and would have been able to explain a lot of what possibly happened that night and also answer a lot of the questions that were left unanswered. I do feel that authorities did handle this case very poorly, ruling it a suicide so quickly and closing the case way too soon before interviewing any of the persons involved thoroughly. Even people who weren't involved, they should have been interviewed to at least rule them out. Also, the mishandling of evidence. Losing evidence, and the evidence that they did have was stored so poorly that it got contaminated either by the chain of custody being broken and being contaminated by whoever handled the evidence, or preserving it poorly so that mold and other bacteria could grow on it and make it unviable. Now, this is just an opinion, but with the chain of custody being broken and being so careless about handling the evidence, then whoever did handle the evidence, I'm going to go out on a limb and say possibly that they did not wear proper PPE, such as rubber gloves, whenever they handled the evidence and they got their DNA on that evidence, which could have possibly been the male DNA that was detected. We don't know for sure. This case is solvable, though, I think. It's a lot harder now to solve it with all the mishaps that have happened, and you most likely won't solve it without a confession from the person involved or the persons involved. But there is a petition on Reddit in looking for answers and to get this case solved for Tiffany's family. So what do you guys think happened to Tiffany? Let me know on social media on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for Campfire Crime Chronicles on your social media platforms and you'll be able to find it. So that concludes this case at the campfire, guys. I know there's more information that I didn't include in this story. There was a lot of information to go over, and I feel like I covered it pretty well. All the resources used to gather the information for this case include, but not limited to, news articles, reports, documentaries, as well as other sources. And I appreciate everyone who has gathered by the campfire for me for this case. Also, if you would like to listen to ad-free shows as well as bonus episodes and get a shout out on the podcast during the most recent episode, then sign up and join me over at the Bonfire. You can find the Bonfire over on Patreon, where there are also different tiers that you can choose from. I appreciate all the support from all the listeners and supporters. Also, if you wish to support the show and not necessarily sign up for a subscription, you can support the show through the Campfire S'mores Fund through the website. The podcast also has a merch store now as well. You can access the merch store through the website at www.campfirecrimechronicles.com. On the website, you can access the merch store, the S'mores Fund, and also get all the episodes of The Campfire. There will also be a link in the show notes, as well as a link to our sponsor of this episode, BetterHelp. So join me next time in 2 weeks as we gather around the campfire for the next case that we dive into around the campfire. Remember to sleep with one eye opened. This is the Campfire Crime Chronicles, a true crime podcast.